there are a couple things. The first one is a lot of people were telling me I'd be a good lawyer at, the age of 12 to 16, which I realize now was an insult. It wasn't actually a career suggestion, which is pretty funny, but they were right.
You're just very argumentative. Is that what they were pointing to?
Yeah, I think that's what they were pointing out.
When you're driven, the need to accomplish a goal is relentless. Hard work and ambition compel you to do whatever's necessary. In my work as a personal injury trial lawyer for 18 years, it's common to meet driven people. Those with drive can have different personalities, careers, or backgrounds, but they possess one common factor. Despite their passions, driven people want to surround and motivate themselves with other driven people. If you want to learn how to overcome obstacles by learning from others, then tune in here. This is the Driven Crowd Podcast.
Thank you for tuning in to episode 55 of the Driven Crowd Podcast, fueled by Snellings Law. I'm your host, Scott Snellings. My guest today is Tyler O'Brien, or as many of you know him better, the Longhair Lawyer. Tyler graduated with a BA in political science and a minor in business administration from Washington State University before heading to law school at Gonzaga University School of Law. He was admitted to practice in the state of California in November of 22 and licensed to practice in Texas recently here in June of 2024. Tyler is working to change the perception of the legal world for the better with a focus on being kind, authentic, and approachable. Tyler, welcome to the Driven Crowd Podcast.
Thanks. It's awesome to be here. When I was going through I have to admit, when you first invited me to be on the podcast, I didn't know exactly what it was. I thought maybe it was just like another legal podcast. And I know you do interview a lot of lawyers, but it was pretty cool to listen to a couple of the episodes and to see so many names of people I know and follow and kind of admire on LinkedIn too. So It's an honor to be here.
Oh, man. Well, thank you for that. And it's going to be a good show for sure. So, Tyler, tell us from the beginning, kind of how did you grow up, where, and what led you to law school?
Yeah. So I grew up in a very small town of Ritzville, Washington, which is actually where I'm at right now. I'm visiting my folks. It's about 1,800 people, a little agricultural community, basically a truck stop off of I-90. And that's where I grew up. So I was always really involved in everything because you had to be when your graduating class is 30, right? So I played, 4 sports and basically had that kind of rural upbringing. Worked on a cattle ranch when I was a kid, and that type of thing. That's kind of where I started. And then, from there, I ended up, academically, I went to Washington State University because it was about an hour and a half away. It was comfortable. A lot of my friends were going there. Seemed like it'd be a good fit. And then, after that, I've stayed very involved in, in everything in my community, whatever I'm involved in throughout my academic time and kind of my life as a person. But I was pretty involved at WSU, and then I moved on to Gonzaga, got my law degree, and professionally, that's kind of how I got to where I am today. But my upbringing was a lot of fun. I mean, because of this rural environment, I really got to spend a lot of time outdoors, which is still something I like to do a lot. I go on a lot of backpacking trips and hunting trips. And so I'm definitely, a lot of people grow up in a small town and they really want to escape and they want to see something totally different. I like to travel and go to cities and see new things, but I'm definitely pretty happy with my upbringing and it's been very impactful to me.
Awesome. So how do you go from working on cattle ranches and in an agricultural society to wanting to get involved in the law?
Well, there are a couple things. The first one is a lot of people were telling me I'd be a good lawyer at, the age of 12 to 16, which I realize now was an insult. It wasn't actually a career suggestion, which is pretty funny, but they were right.
You're just very argumentative. Is that what they were pointing to?
Yeah, I think that's what they were pointing out. I am pretty argumentative and assertive. And I know things, right? So, but when I was around 16, sophomore in high school, I kind of became the go-to guy amongst my peers to kind of know all the rules, know the student handbook, know what the teachers could and couldn't get away with. And there were one particular teacher who will go unnamed because it's a very small town,
Right.
that caused some issues. And I realized I could be an advocate for people who were not so good at advocating for themselves, not so good at navigating institutions and systems like that. Naturally, when I was 16, I wouldn't have described it in that manner, but that's kind of what was going on in the back of my mind. So that drove me toward the idea of becoming an advocate and becoming a lawyer. I also, basically all the men in my family were involved in construction, one shape or form, civil engineering, construction supervisor, architect, surveyor, that type of thing. So I really wanted to involve myself in that industry. And I felt that I could basically have this kind of intellectual pursuit of being a lawyer and work with construction companies. So when I was about 16, that's what I wanted to do. I was like, I'm going to be a lawyer. I'm going to work for construction companies. I'm going to be a contracts lawyer, whatever that meant to me at the time.
Right.
But that basically propelled me through WSU. I started off with a degree in civil engineering, and I really didn't mind the math so much. My cohort, my freshman year, just drove me absolutely crazy. I was like, I don't think I could work with these people my whole life. I don't think I could do this, which is ironic because my wife's a chemical engineer, which has got to be like the worst kind, Obviously, I know a lot of engineers. There's a lot of cool people, but for whatever reason, it didn't click for me. So I swapped over to political science. But that whole time, I was like, once I get done here, I'm going to go to law school and become, that kind of advocate. But I mostly want to deal with construction. That's what I always thought.
Very cool. All right. So you go to law school, and what do you find when you get there at Gonzaga? Is it what you thought it would be, or completely different?
For the first couple of weeks, or maybe even like 2 or 3 months, if I felt so in over my head that I couldn't really make heads or tails of it.
Sure.
I'm not sure what I really expected, but I guess those doctrinal classes probably weren't what I was anticipating. It was so much more academic than I thought. What I realized pretty quickly, though, was that the entire system of law school was very peculiar in that it's kind of set up to pit people against each other. That forced curve grading makes it so that one student's success is to the detriment of another student, which I didn't really like. I've always been a competitive person, but I didn't like the way that I felt it discouraged collaboration.
Sure.
Basically. I guess more so than I was almost more interested in figuring out how to navigate that system than I was in the actual subject matter of some of my courses. But that's kind of what that first couple months at least was like.
Yeah, I remember my very first quarter. I went to Baylor, who we've matched up against Gonzaga a couple of times here in NCAA basketball games.
Oh, yeah.
But I remember my very first quarter, like after the first week of law school, I was like, I don't know if I'm like doing the right thing. I mean, I'm reading what they're telling me to read. It's kind of making sense. But in most law schools, at least where I went, you had a test at the end of the quarter, and that was it. That was your grade. And so it was really, really hard to figure out if you were doing the right thing, if you were grasping these concepts. And, our exams were like 2 or 3 questions, maybe. And it was just a page and a half long fact pattern, and you just had to go and find the issues and write about them. And so for me, I was completely confused. Thankfully, I had a mentor who kind of created fact patterns and helped me work through, like, hey, here's how you write a law school exam. And so that really helped me a ton, just confidence wise. But yeah, that first semester or first quarter can be completely overwhelming. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, it's brutal too. The sheer volume of information that you have to navigate and figure out how to sift through is just absurd. At least it feels absurd at the time. I think one of the biggest problems is you just don't know what is and isn't relevant. So,
Right.
Where a 2L, 3L, second year or third year law student might be just skimming information, skimming, reading, and getting everything they need in a short period of time. That person that's brand new has to read every single word, and you can't retain it all. You don't know what to retain, and it can be a real challenging and a real surprise for some people when that midterm grade comes around, or final grade if that's all you're going to get for feedback. So I'm with you.
Yeah, I remember it was my first quarter, and I was in the library. I didn't even know yet how to look up cases. And I was looking at one, and I had a buddy who I'd gone to undergrad with, and he was in there, and he's like, "Hey man, what you looking for?" And I showed him the case, and I was like, "I'm trying to find X." And he scanned through it, was like flipping pages, like, "Oh, here you go. Here's where it's at right here." And I was like, "How did you do that?" And he's like, "Oh, you'll get there. You'll get there." And he's right. You just eventually, with all that practice and reading so many cases, you understand like how opinions are structured and where to go for the meat of what you're looking for. All right. So you graduate from law school, and had your idea changed at that point as to what you wanted to go do, or what was your thought process there?
Yeah, a little bit. So I worked in my last semester of law school, or the summer going into that 3L year. I got my first law related job as a law clerk. I worked for a boutique business and construction litigation firm out in Spokane. By the time I was into law school, I thought I wanted to be a construction litigation attorney. And that experience, while it was really valuable, and there were certain things I enjoyed, made me realize that's not really what I was after. I actually wanted to be more of a transactional lawyer. And basically, I worked from that May all the way through December full time. I was able to get, I think, 15 credits of externship, basically 15 school credits that last semester for working full time. And basically in that time frame, I was like, yeah, I don't know that litigation is what I want to do. I really enjoyed writing some of the pleadings, making some of the big arguments, helping with arbitration, stuff like that. But all the little day-to-day, keeping up with the filings and all the stupid motions and all the stupid discovery requests, I was like, man, this is not my thing. This feels like a waste of time. So,
especially in construction litigation, those of you who aren't familiar with construction litigation, there's usually like 100 parties in every case. It's insane. The style of the case, which is how it's titled, can go for like 2 or 3 pages if everyone's name is listed in there. And I think that's super valuable, figuring out what you don't want to do, especially with the law. At Baylor, where I went to law school, everybody has to take practice court. And so you get a feel for, hey, do I like being on my feet, doing trial type work? Do I like doing litigation type work? And a lot of people don't, and that's perfectly fine. It's not for everybody, and nor should it be. But I think it's so valuable for people to figure out what they want to do, what they don't want to do, because especially with the law, you go to your first job like you did in construction litigation, and man, it's so easy to get stuck there. It's really hard once you start getting your feet in the door, because there's so much to learn, to really switch areas, or even go from litigation to transactional.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are scared to transition away or to or from anything, though, right? That's something I see a lot with my generation. They're like, 2 years into their senior associate or something, and they're like, well, I'm so invested now, I can't switch. But I also think that it's kind of a false narrative to an extent. I think really you can pivot if you want to, whether it be from, I don't know, construction litigation to personal injury, or transactional to appellate work, or whatever it might be. I think it's doable. I just think I think that it's intimidating, and I think that there are a lot of folks that have a vested interest in their underlings not going away, who kind of have a tendency to deter people from, making that career change, So there's definitely a balance there.
There is, and I'm 100% with you. There's a lot of factors that make it difficult to do that. But at the end of the day, if you're not happy in your career, especially if you're a lawyer, you are spending a whole lot of time doing it, then you got to find a way to develop that courage, that knowledge, whatever it is that you need to make that leap. Even if it is taking a step backward, even if it's giving up pay while you go learn a new area, whatever it is. But the sooner that you can figure that out, the easier it's going to be for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, both from just a trajectory perspective, but also it's the more you get invested in one thing, the harder it is to pivot to something else. That's
for sure.
Absolutely.
for sure. All right. So you figure out you don't want to do litigation. And so what was the next step for you?
Well, it was kind of a weird transition time in life for me because I'd just finished law school. I graduated a semester early, so I graduated that December, took the bar in February. May rolled around, and I'd had an offer, which I'd actually accepted to stay on as an associate with this litigation firm.
Right.
But at that same time, my fiance, she's my wife now. My wife graduated from her grad school PhD program and took a job down in California. And basically, with her kind of specialty, there aren't as many career opportunities available for her as me.
Right.
So I'm like, I can be a lawyer anywhere. We're moving to California. During that time, I knew I was going to have to take the California bar exam. And I knew it was going to take me until probably December of that year to get a license.
Right.
I decided I was pretty sure I wanted to go out on my own and open up a bit more of a transactional consulting type practice. And so that's might be straying from your question a little bit, but that's kind of went into that transition, and the move to California expedited the transition to solo practice. I'd imagine if it wasn't kind of for that forced move, I probably would have stayed on as an associate at least through the end of the year, maybe a couple years before transitioning to my own practice. My practice might be more litigation focused too. Who knows? Yeah.
So that takes a lot of guts. You're fresh out of law school and essentially hanging a shingle down in California, doing something that you have never done before because you don't have a litigation practice. You have a transactional practice. So kind of give me the thought process behind that and how you made it work.
Yeah. Well, to an extent, I don't want to make it sound like I completely started from scratch, because within that litigation practice, there were contract drafting and review and entity formation issues, maybe not entity formation so much, but there were these issues that came up, and I became the go-to person within that litigation firm to handle those transactional issues because everyone knew I had an interest in it. So it's not like I was starting my own practice having, never written a contract before or something like that. I think it's really important, as I just had a conversation on the phone with a 3L earlier this morning who wants us to open up his own practice. And I think it's really important for people to understand that before you open your doors, you have to have developed that threshold level of skill within your practice area. It's so important. It's so fundamental. It seems obvious, but I think a lot of people think they can pick it up along the way. So basically, I had that transactional law background, and I had enough of it that I knew what types of things I wanted to do and could handle. Basically, I felt that there was an underserved demographic of basically clients who were maybe individuals or small business owners who normally would not seek out an attorney at all because they would assume that attorney services would just be too expensive for them or be inaccessible to them or that their problems were too small. And I was pretty sure that I could develop an intake process and a practice that would allow me to serve these smaller clients with smaller issues in a pretty quick manner and be profitable off of it. I feel like I dove down a rabbit hole, maybe didn't answer your question there, but that was kind of the thought process at the time.
Yeah, that was fantastic. So to your previous point, becoming an entrepreneur and owning your own law firm is such a big topic these days. I mean, we see it all the time on LinkedIn. And I think the big gap there is, to do that and to be really successful at that, you have to have the knowledge of the subject matter. Had I tried to go start a personal injury firm right out of law school, I would have committed malpractice right and left because I didn't know what I was doing. I had to go get that experience and, that higher level knowledge and get to where I was a solid lawyer before I could go out and start a law firm. Right. And I think a lot of people, that gets lost. Like, well, I have the base knowledge. I can figure this stuff out. And the figuring it out while you're starting a business, that is not the place you want to be.
No, I've noticed that a lot of people, I think maybe I'd even say us as human beings, we have a tendency to really understand the complexities of the things we know. We think that our knowledge area is particularly complex.
Right.
We understand why other people can't just dive into it. But for some reason, we all have this tendency to assume that other areas are not complex. I see that all the time with estate planning. Everybody wants to be an estate planner because they think it's simple. They think you just bring people in, you've got these standard form wills and revocable living trusts, you just crank them out, it's easy money. And in a way, in some way, it kind of is when you're working with a certain demographic of clients and you really know what you're doing. What people don't understand is there are so many different pitfalls and local laws, and the amount of fundamental knowledge of like federal tax law that you need to have just as a threshold to even be a decent estate planner, for even for people who don't have that much money, it's really significant. So there's definitely a danger, whether it's a new attorney trying to open up shop and hang their shingle right out of law school, or a more experienced attorney trying to transition to a new area. There's a real danger of getting in over your head really fast because, as we say, you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah. And we all have a tendency to think we can figure it out a lot faster than what we really can. And hey, maybe you can figure it out if you can figure out what it is that you don't know, which is huge.
Right. And that's where, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Go ahead.
That's where if you can, finding someone to mentor you through those pieces is really huge. For me on the estate planning side, one of my best friends he's brilliant. He's one of few people, which I'll just outright say might be smarter than me, like, just compared, but, he's a CPA. We graduated our bachelor's programs about the same time, and he has about 4 years specifically with gift trusts and estate taxation. Really knows his stuff. Without him, I would not have been able to acquire the knowledge necessary to be an estate planner. And I don't even do the types of complicated trust arrangements that he deals with. He's working with clients that have, in some cases, like 30 million to maybe like $500 million in wealth. I prefer to stay around people who are a bit more modest and have simpler arrangements because I'm a solo. I don't have the capacity to handle those types of things. But yeah, mentorship is huge. If you can find someone that can, to some extent, guide you and help you through the processes, or if you really want to be involved in litigation, help you to know the lay of the land, kind of the local informal customs of working with whoever you need to work with at the courthouse, it'll really make a big difference.
And so that's kind of the practice piece there of owning your own firm and having a solid ability to practice in your specific area. What else have you had to seek mentorship on or learn as you've created your own law firm? Obviously, marketing is huge. What about systems and operations? Take us down those roads. Yeah,
I think as far as seeking mentorship, to tell you the truth, aside from my buddy Avery that helps me out with estate planning, I really haven't had a mentor for anything else. So I figured out pretty much everything else on my own. And I don't mean to make that sound like I have it all figured out. I certainly don't. But I think one of the biggest things for anyone starting their own practice, they might not have a background in, like you said, marketing, but operations and legal operations is a huge one. You have to know how to navigate your own intake system and your practice management system. You need to keep accurate books, which means you probably either need to integrate your practice management system with QuickBooks. You may need to hire a bookkeeper to do that. But, if you're starting out on your own, budget-wise, that might be something that falls on you. So those little pieces. Another one, which you would think would be obvious because I'm a transactional attorney, but something that really stumped me in the beginning was actually entity formation and which state my what turned out to be my solo practice. At this time, I don't actually have, my sole proprietorship. At this time, I don't actually have an entity formed for the Longhair Lawyer. It's just a trade name. But that took a lot of mulling over to decide what was the best route. Just because of different requirements. I practice and I live in California. They don't allow professional entities to have a PLLC. Professional corporations might have some different tax disadvantages and all this different type of stuff. Malpractice insurance is a big one. Shopping around for malpractice insurance as a solo, particularly with a multi-jurisdictional practice, can actually be a little bit challenging. So all of those back end pieces that in a large firm, I guess it's either already figured out or maybe you'd have a dedicated bookkeeper or firm manager to handle. Those are things that people really need to think about. And before they launch themselves available to the public, they should probably have it all down in a business plan to make sure that that they're capable of handling it, that they're willing to handle it, and that it's financially feasible for them to do.
What is something that you hadn't really thought through when you started your law firm that really surprised you?
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't had too many moments where I've been shocked, and I'm grateful to say I haven't had any really major screw ups, I guess you could say, or setbacks, I guess would be the friendlier
Sure.
friendlier word. I don't have an HR department, so I'm free to be as hard on myself as I want.
You do. It's just
right?
you.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think the biggest thing would be one of the biggest, most puzzling frustrations for me was just getting a malpractice insurance policy that was reasonably priced. And that was really just a challenge because at the time I got my first one, I was in both California and Washington, but I did the majority of my business in Washington because that's where my network is. That's still true today. And basically, as I recall, it's been a year and a half, 2 years, the brokerages in California didn't want to write me insurance because I did the majority of my business in Washington. And the brokers in Washington didn't want to write me insurance because I actually lived in California, which is a more expensive market. I guess it's more challenging to underwrite in. So that was probably just the biggest headache. It took so much of my time. And of course, naturally, the whole time I really wasn't doing anything particularly complicated. It's not that I was worried about committing malpractice within that couple month window where I'm trying to set the whole thing up. It was really more just that I knew I needed that from a risk management perspective,
Sure.
But also because I think in both of those states, if you don't have malpractice insurance, you're legally and ethically required to provide your clients notice that you don't have it. And starting every consultation with, hey, by the way, I'm so confident in myself, I don't carry malpractice insurance. I imagine that would not be a great, that could be a wrinkle in the intake process, right? So it was something that really just took quite a while to resolve. And ultimately, I finally just found a company that would do it. I think it was AMBA. And this year I actually switched over to Berkshire Hathaway, which was the easiest process I've encountered with dealing with that type of thing. So
nice. All right. So tell us about the long hair. Have you always had long hair, or is this something that you grew out as you got older, or where did that come from?
Yeah. So no, I grew my hair out a little bit in college at WSU. I mean, maybe down to like right about here. Didn't really look that good. It was an awkward stage. So I gave up. And then when I went to Gonzaga, I just decided I'm going to grow my hair out. Like, what the heck? I've always wanted to do that for one reason or another. And I grew it out pretty much all the way through law school. And what was funny was as I grew my hair out, I kept encountering people who would say like, oh, when are you going to cut your hair? You can't be a lawyer if you have long hair.
Right.
Just over and over and over again. And I just got to a point, I've always been a little rebellious. I was just like, that definitely 100% does not matter. I really don't think anybody actually cares about that. And I've been trying to prove people wrong on that ever since. So far, it seems to be working. But when I went out on my own, there are a lot of things about the legal profession that I don't like, I guess, and that I think a lot of people don't. I think we have a very negative image about us. Lawyers are the butt of every joke, and frankly, to an extent, it's for good reason. It's like any I shouldn't say that. Essentially, the stereotypes about lawyers kind of ring true when it comes to some people. And that's why we have such a negative perception. That's why this client base that I want to work with, people who don't regularly work with attorneys don't want to reach out to us. They assume we're jackasses, basically. And so I was like, I want to have a brand image that does not align with the traditional image of an attorney at all. And I was like, why not just make the whole image the hair? It really just breaks things up. And while people might not know what I'm about necessarily straight out of the gate, they know I'm different. So that's where the long hair lawyer comes from. I also get asked all the time, or told all the time now, that I can't ever cut my hair. But just like those people before, one day I'll prove them wrong, because it's really a logo and a brand concept. And, I can cut my hair. I've still got the hat. I think people will recognize that it's a little different. So,
hey, if Metallica could cut their hair in the 90s, then you can cut your hair whenever you want to.
Thanks. I like that.
All right. So you have your brand. Walk us through, like, marketing wise, kind of what have you been working on and what's really working for you in terms of bringing in new clients?
Yeah, for sure. So initially I starting out, I'm like, I'm going to keep this as low budget as possible. I'm aiming, my target market is younger people and younger professionals. That's what I want to deal with, partly just because I knew I was going to be completely remote, at least for the foreseeable future. I'm like, I want to target people who are good at using technology, because they're going to need to be in order to have a successful client relationship with me. So because of that, and for the sake of cost savings, I figured I will just advertise on social media. I'll set up social media accounts and we'll kind of go from there. So I started off with, I still have them all, but basically LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, which I don't do a whole lot with, and Facebook, with an Instagram and Facebook linked. And basically I just started off and said, I'm going to grow these accounts. I actually did take the time to create a brand brief statement. So I kind of went through every single one of these social media accounts and said, what do I want my voice to sound like in this account? Do I want it to be professional? Do I want it to be educational? Created different ones for each one. And then I've developed social media from there. Now, I will say that the most successful of those platforms for me has been LinkedIn, because a lot of attorneys are like me and they don't really care for the conventional image and the stereotypes that are affiliated with being a lawyer. And so they really align well with my brand. I'm also, because I'm self-employed, I am free to say just about whatever I want on that platform. So to an extent, I get to voice the frustrations of some of the people who would be concerned about doing so, to the powers that be. Sure. Within their own firm. So I've seen great success on LinkedIn, and LinkedIn, more so than these other accounts, has translated into actual clients coming in my door, typically because another lawyer, or occasionally an accountant, or another service professional, who kind of make up the majority of my following, will basically just call me up and say, hey, I have somebody who has this problem. Can you help them? And just pass on a referral to me, kind of no questions asked. I've also been able to develop some kind of personal relationships with attorneys who are kind of all over the country too, including the states in which I practice in. And that's resulted in a lot of mentorship, which isn't, so much to your question as to how I get clients, but it's also resulted in referrals as well. So that's been it. Aside from that, I have done some print advertising as well, specifically in Eastern Washington, where I'm from, because people, I was involved enough in my small community that people in this county and maybe a couple counties over kind of recognize my name. So I've sent some print, like postcard type of advertisements to them, and gotten a couple clients that way. Mostly as it relates to, that was all related to entity formation and filing beneficial ownership information reports. But yeah, I also write a lot of my content kind of carries over from one platform to the other.
Sure.
I write a fair amount of blog posts. I wouldn't say a lot. It probably averages out to about 1 or 2 a month, but I share those blog posts across the different platforms. And then I'll also include QR codes to relevant blog posts when I send out those postcards, and I use those QR codes on my business cards as well, so that when I hand someone a business card, instead of it having my email address on it or whatever, it has a link to 2 or 3 blog posts that I think that person might find interesting. Why the Longhair Lawyer exists, maybe something related to entity formation, or an article I've written about the law, and then one other thing. But that pretty much summarizes my marketing efforts. It's been a little bit sporadic. There have definitely been changes to the plan. There's changes all the time,
Sure,
especially
yeah,
with
man.
Instagram and TikTok and the platforms that I'm less successful on. I'm always trying to find the right thing. I think I'm getting closer and closer all the time, but that's been the focus.
That's marketing in general. Is you're constantly evolving and trying to keep up and figure out which lever to pull that can really make a difference. So let me ask you about LinkedIn a little bit. A lot of people have really started jumping on in LinkedIn, certainly in the attorney area. What content strategy have you found to really, really work for you?
Yeah, I suppose so as far as types of content, my posts that are the most successful, that get the most interaction, that get the most messages to me, gain the most followers, are pretty long. So my most successful posts are long form content that has no image associated with it and is literally up to the maximum amount of words that you can post on there. And I think that, I don't know for sure how the algorithm works. I think the reason that those posts are the most successful is, one, they're the ones I put the most time into. So there really is some quality information. I'm asking some fascinating, controversial questions, or I'm basically putting a lot of effort in to make something that people are actually interested in reading. And then when they do, I think the amount of screen time or impression time that goes into them actually looking at, and then maybe going back through and looking over again because they want to reread some part of it, really results in a lot of success on the platform. So those are the things that go the farthest. But I have quite a mix. Like, sometimes I do big, heavy hitting stuff like that. Other times I will share a reel or a video of me doing something that I'd even share on my personal Instagram. Like, the other day I shared one of doing a 360 wake surfing, and then I just had a little joke blip over it, and that one did really well. So it's kind of all over the board, but I think the main thing is posting people will say you have to post consistently. I think what's equally important is posting quality content. And by quality content, I mean things that you would actually read,
Sure.
stop and read through if you were, if you encountered it yourself, things that you're truly interested in.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Tyler. I got one last question for you. Give me your top 3 books. Could be fiction, nonfiction,
all
whatever.
Time. So I'm going to reveal myself as a bad lawyer, and I'm going to tell you that I don't read that much. I've lost my love for reading.
You're not the first lawyer I've heard that from.
I suppose, okay, a couple of my top books. One would actually be Huckleberry Finn. I loved Huckleberry Finn in high school English. I think if you take the time to read through the whole thing, while it has become quite a controversial book, it really is an incredible period piece. And if you think about the way that the time in which Mark Twain wrote that book, and the way that he portrayed some of the characters in there, it's actually quite progressive, and it says a lot of things about that time to be in America. The other one that may or may not be good to read if you are a lawyer, but would be good for everyone else, would be called The Last Days of Night. And it's a book that is about the fight for the patent for the light bulb. A lot of people don't know it, but Thomas Edison, Nikola Tesla, and George Westinghouse invented the light bulb all around the same time, kind of their own accord. And the incandescent light bulb, Thomas Edison's the one that beat them all to the patent office. So that book, Last Days of Night, is written from the perspective of the patent attorney for George Westinghouse. And it is a historical fiction, but it's a pretty good book. And then I guess other than that, The book I've been reading the most lately is I think it's called The Guide to the Hills or something like that. And it is like volume, I can't remember what volume it is, or it's like the 10th edition of the all-inclusive guide to mountaineering. So
All right.
if you want to get into backpacking, rock climbing, go climb Mount Rainier if you're up by me, or maybe Everest or something, that would be a good book to read. I can vouch for it.
All right. Well, I feel a LinkedIn post coming for, what would you pack, or what would you suggest someone pack for their very first hike?
Yeah,
right,
that would be a good one. Actually.
That's a piece of content for you right there. Well, hey, thank you so much for being on the show, and thank you so much for everyone who's tuned in to this episode of the Driven Crowd podcast. And we'll see you next time.